Hi, welcome, and namaste to the Yoga Out of the Box podcast. My name is Marv, and today I'll speak to Andrea, who is an Italian living in Barcelona. He's yoga practitioner and teacher himself. We had a super nice chat and talk about his personal yoga journey. We covered some amazing topics about how he came to yoga, which is I think, really resonating with a lot of people. We were discussing different topics as how to deal with your family, how does a real yoga practice can look like, how does your style as teacher evolves, and what do you take from different classes, and what is the point you maybe step away from a class of a different teacher, as well as changing your perspective of getting not too much attached. um, yeah, I think in this episode we have a super good example for how a normal modern yoga approach and modern yoga lifestyle can look like in a day-to-day life, which is not way too far from like you or me as a normal person. So Andrea is not like a super famous influencer, like a super unindependent or independent yoga teacher internationally. I think this episode is really relatable, and I really enjoyed our conversation. And I will definitely meet him when I'm next time in Barcelona. So, yeah, let's get right into it. I hope you stick with the episode around, and don't forget to follow this podcast, give us a good review, and please share this episode with somebody who needs to hear a bit more about yoga and how yoga can be used in every way of life. Hi, Andrea. Who are you, and why is it a good idea to talk with you about the topic of yoga, and how did your yoga journey start?
Hi Marvin, namaste. Thanks both for having me. I'm just a humble yoga practitioner and yoga teacher. I'm Italian living in Barcelona. I'm just glad that I can share my experience. I hope it's just going to resonate with some people out there. So my yoga journey started in the gym, actually. So at first, I was not interested at all about yoga. I was the kind of very cliche person with no knowledge at all that thought that yoga was basically meaning sitting down doing Om all the time. So I went to the gym, they were doing a yoga class, so I just gave it a try and I just found it interesting. But at first, I was just mixing weightlifting with yoga, and I was not really going much into the philosophy of everything. And then after a while, I start signing up for some tryouts for some yoga clubs. I was in London at the time, so some yoga clubs in London. So I got more and more interested about yoga, but still mainly focused on the asana practice. After that, I moved to Tenerife, and to be honest, I kind of paused a little bit my yoga practice there. So because there was not many studios around my area, or at least none that I could find. So my yoga journey also had a little bit of a pause. And then after that, I had a little bit of a rough time when I was living in Tenerife. So I really needed to start fresh new. So I basically left my job, left my house, and I went to India with my boyfriend, and we decided to do this yoga teacher training. And actually, mainly it was my boyfriend that pushed me to go to this teacher training because he was actually giving me classes. So the way I was practicing in Tenerife was kind of like doing private classes in a way with my partner. Then I did my teacher training in Rishikesh, and I went there just thinking, oh, I'm just traveling and practicing a little bit of yoga. I'm never going to become a teacher. And things kind of changed along the way. I just learned for the first time that yoga was not just asana. I learned a lot about the philosophy. The teachers were incredible. We studied a lot of philosophy. We also studied a lot of pranayama. And after that, I did another 300-hour teacher training, this time in Goa. It was kind of different from the one in Rishikesh. It was a little bit more westernized, I would say. It was super interesting as well. I had amazing connection, especially with the other students, that I attended teachers training with, the location was incredible for me. So I think I learned a lot on the yoga side of things, but I think as a life lesson, it just impacting a lot of me. So basically, after this two teachers training, in theory, I was supposed to go back to Europe and find another full-time job, but I decided to go back to India and continue my yoga journey. So I basically managed to find a couple of places that were interesting to work with me as a teacher. So I went to Mysore first. I stayed there for a month, and then I went to Goa, in the south of India, and I've been there kind of like 2 years and a half. So I was living for the off season, and then I was living there during the dry season. Then during the rainy season, I was traveling around. I was going back to India and then back to India. Sorry, back to Italy and then back to India. So I was supposed to keep doing that, and then that's where COVID happened. So when COVID happened, I had to leave the studio. I went back to Italy for a while, and at first I was kind of like waiting for the yoga studio to reopen. I was thinking it's just gonna be a couple of months. Next dry season, starting from September, October, I'm gonna go back to Goa, and it kind of like never happened. The yoga studio didn't reopen, so I kind of like decided to move to Barcelona as a short-term plan. And then the short-term plan kind of like became medium-term plan and potentially like a long-term plan. So now that's where I'm living. I'm practicing a lot in different studios here. As you said, I quite love Jivamukti, but I'm also teaching in two other studios. So if I need to give them like a shout out, they're called Yoga Club and Shanti. So they're also pretty nice studios around here.
Was already a super nice wrap up about your personal journey. And I think there's so much in there. We already had our pre-talk and we will dive into a lot of different stuff now. But let's start with your time in Tenerife, and maybe let me start with the question of how does your yoga perspective changed, and when does your yoga perspective really changed the first time?
No, to be honest, even when I was in Tenerife, I think I was still thinking about yoga as a physical practice in a way, just thinking about the stretching side. It's only when I moved to Rishikesh that I actually learned more about yoga when I did my first teacher's training, and I learned that there was way more behind yoga, that there was full philosophy and way of living, really. And I became really interested. I realized that basically all the yamas and niyamas really resonate with me, with my way of living. Like that's the path I wanted to take as much as I could. So that's when basically I realized, okay, this is not at all what I expected, but this is resonating with me on a much deeper level, on a level that I was not even expecting. And I also saw kind of like the results in the way I was living and behaving. Like I told you that I was spending kind of like a rough time in Tenerife. So for me, it was also a little bit of a rediscovering and kind of like understanding how you should be living according to yamas and yamas, kind of like affecting also the way I was thinking. This is actually what I was looking for. And I want to kind of like also try and spread a little bit more about yoga with other people. If I can try and find more balance in my life, if possible, in my little, I also want to help other people to be able to find more balance.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think the first yoga teacher training is always like changing a lot of like stuff in your life and a lot of like typical views you have on your life. It's even super interesting that you really resonated with all of this philosophy part, which is nowadays in the modern yoga society, I think, which a lot of people think is way too spiritual and keep them away from getting in touch with yoga. So it's super interesting to see, okay, this really catched your attention and really was resonating with you and your own values. What would you say, how did it change your life?
Yeah, I think so, because I think as a person before, I was always kind of like living in the future. So I was a big planner on holidays, for example. I was thinking, okay, this is what I want to do next month. These are all the places I want to visit when I go to this place. This is what I want to achieve in 2 months. I want to move to Tenerife because this is what I want to experience when I move to Tenerife. And then obviously, every time something was happening, there was always disappointment. So I think something that really, really resonated with me was the live your life with no expectation, always accepting everything that comes, because in that way, you're never going to be disappointed. And I think I really try to make this my philosophy for my way of living. because I stopped thinking I want to go there and this is what I want to achieve. And obviously, it's a challenge. At first, it's not going to happen. Like I was thinking, when I go to Goa to do my next teacher training, I want to go even more deeper into the asana. I want to have all of this philosophy. I want to have all of this. And I try to change all of that to say, I'm just going to accept whatever it comes. Like if maybe I'm not going to have the teacher I was expecting, it's completely fine. If I'm not going to have a sunny days, that's completely fine. And I also realized that that's not the way I was living before. Like me, but also some of my friends from before, we were spending a day, a very beautiful day, and then suddenly it was raining. And then the day was ruined because something was happening that was basically ruining our expectation of our plans. And now it's different. I realized that I kind of like feel more happy throughout the day, throughout weeks, the months, and I don't get my day ruined anymore because I have expectation for something to happen. And the same happens with relationships. I think this also helped me a lot because I was having quite a lot of troubles with relationship with my partner and my family because I was always expecting them to behave a specific way. Like I was thinking, if I was in your shoes, I would probably try and help you. I will do this. I will try to do all of these actions and then try to understand that all the people behave in a different way and we cannot have specific expectations from them really also help my relationship because I was not expecting them to behave in the way I wanted them to behave.
Super interesting point. Again, because I think even our living in the future or having all these expectations how a future should look like is actually a kind of standard in our modern society. And of course there's a lot of good stuff related to that because we can make plans, we can like achieve our goals, it gives us a lot of drive. Of course we always have to see as well like the attachment side of that and how dependent we get from our own images and from our own stories we tell ourselves. So I think it's a way longer way and a way slower way than it's sad, right? So you need a lot of time to really implement this in your life and really sat back and take this step back every time, like you described how you did it for yourself and even for your friends. And so I think it's super interesting that this even spreads throughout your friends and that you even get this kind of like detachment from that. I think even so, it's sometimes, of course, easier depending on your surroundings. So, for example, in the yoga teacher training, like you said, it must have been easy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember they told me also this when I was in Rishikesh. Like now everything is easy. You are surrounded by beings that are looking to work on themselves. They are here to study. They are not working. They don't have any responsibilities. Their food gets served. You go around the town. It's a holy city. There is no alcohol. There is no meat. There are all people smiling at you because they're all on a self-discovery journey. Then when you go back home, and then you need to go back to your work. There is traffic, there is family asking you for things, and you see people that are not on the same journey to you. That's where the real challenge is going to start, where really you're going to need to start applying all of this. So that's something I always say, like yoga is not really what you do into the shala, it really starts after. And one of the biggest challenges is also trying to maintain your mindset when you spend a lot of time with your family. So I think COVID was a big challenge for me for sure.
This is super important, I think, to mention again that we can now really see in your personal journey how your definition of yoga changed through your own experience, right? So in the beginning, you have just started with yoga as a kind of stretching in the gym, like there just physical practice. And after really attending and deepening your knowledge and putting in the work, you finally saw like transformational stuff in your life happening. And I think so this is like super interesting and super showing off how a way of looking to yoga can change and how you can implement yoga as like more than just your physical practice, than more as a kind of lifestyle. And even like you said, I think COVID was like a super challenging time for all of us. And even so, dealing with your family is always a kind of challenging situation, I guess, with for most of our people. Maybe even so, it's super relatable for some of the listeners to really deal with this kind of situations, because all of us have been in this kind of situations. Um, so, what do you think? What did you took mostly from your second yoga teacher training? Because this was already like a really, really broad kind of like change in your yoga journey. And you told us that you really took the next step in your next yoga teacher training in Goa. Where did you do it directly, and how did this change your yoga journey again?
Yeah, I did it in the south of Goa. So obviously now I'm super happy about this experience completely. But at the time I was finding a lot of challenges. Um, I, you know, I was telling you we need to accept things for where they are, but sometimes it's a challenge. So at the time I was feeling that I traveled all the way to India because I wanted to learn from source in a way. And there were two teachers that were not from India. So I kind of like felt a little bit taken back because I felt, oh, I really wanted to learn with Indian teachers. And then these two teachers were not fully resonating with me for the way they were teaching, behaving in a way. They were kind of like on a different wave, on different mindsets. So for me, it was a little bit of a challenge to try and understand also things that were not going according to my expectations once again. And I also felt that the first teacher training was super humbling for me. Obviously, I didn't really know much about yoga. Maybe that's also what caused a little bit more troubles with the second one because I felt, oh, this is not completely in line with what some of my teachers were saying, or maybe some ways of teaching. Even if I was basically completely new to yoga, I felt, I saw the teachers not looking at the students for the entire class, focusing a lot on a beautiful vinyasa flow. And I already felt this is not in line with what I want to have. But then after a while, I started to realize, okay, if I know that teachers needs to focus on their students. Like they're not there to do their own self-practice. They're there to give something to students. And I feel that this teacher is not doing that. Maybe that's what I need to learn. Apart from learning about a flow they can apply later, I can also saw things that I think are not working for me as a student. And I'm going to show that I'm going to apply that in the future when I'm going to become a teacher. So if I see that I don't like when the student is not connecting with me as a student, it's never looking at me. I just want to ensure that my eyes are going to be on the students as much as I can when I'm going to start teaching. So kind of like trying to look the silver lining in a way.
I think this relates really good to the topic before. So to deal with your expectations and like really integrate what you learned, how your perspective changed from your first teacher training, you got already the challenge from the universe in your second teacher training to yeah, deal with this kind of expectations and with your kind of like things you wanted to achieve here. I think what's really outstanding for me is the shift of, I think, anyways, this defined, of course, your style of your own teaching for sure, and we will talk about this later. What would you do nowadays if you, for example, visit a class? We talked about this before, that you are not just teaching classes, you also visit classes in different studios. And how do you react to teachers which are not aligned with your values and your kind of teaching? And how would you react in such a kind of class? Would you leave the class at any point, or how would you react with that?
Well, I think nowadays, always, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm always in the right. I'm always trying to take the best. Obviously, sometimes I go to classes and I tend to think, oh, I don't like this way of teaching. Maybe it's not clear. There is something I feel like I don't like. I try to move over that, and I always try to find a silver lining, to be honest. It happens that I go to classes and I tend to analyze the way of teaching, but I always try to push back these kind of thoughts, just trying to focus on my own practice without judging the teaching style. But I think as a student overall, it's good to try also different kind of classes, different teachers, because there is always something that resonates with different people. So that's what happened with me as well. I've been trying to go to as many classes as I can, to as many teachers as I can, and I keep doing the same because there is always something that you can get from teachers. So even from the teachers that I felt they're not resonating with me, so maybe I'm not gonna go to all the classes as regular. I always try and find something positive from their classes. And I hope my students will do the same with me, so they won't judge me too harshly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there will be always like a kind of comparison, that's for sure. I think this is just human, but of course, I think it's this shift of like seeing the silver linings, and maybe even if you're triggered from some kind of like teaching style or from your own perspective of teaching, this is, I think, the better name for that. To step back and really go again to the real practice of yoga, which is like stepping apart, being calm, and just like observing what you can take out of this situation, and even going there like, okay, the glass is um empty, and receiving, and like you said, you can take something from everybody, I think, and there will be for every kind of yoga style and every kind of yoga person and teacher a different like solution and a different way they can approach and they can relate to it. So it's more about like, okay, what can you personally take from this situation? And I think this is super valuable again. You said your second teacher training as well in the beginning was more about like your personal growth, your personal experience, and I think this sounds like really awesome. Do you think it will be always, or people should have these expectations about a yoga teacher training at all, or that they really have this deep personal experience? And what would be your tips to like have this kind of experience?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was the same as in I was lucky enough to have a very small group, so it was only seven of us, and to make very meaningful connection with every single person that was there, and I'm still in touch with all of them. But I will also say that to people to not go to teacher training, kind of like expecting like a self-discovery journey or eat, pray, love kind of like experience of to find friends for life, because every experience could be different. So that's where the disappointment would start happening. So that was my experience, but for other people, it could be like a completely different experience. So you really need to go there only with the idea of wanting to learn more about yoga, not even necessarily to wanting to become a teacher, and just taking the training for what it is. Obviously, a little bit of, I would say, kind of like online searching to see who are the teachers, where is the location could help. But for me, it was also a little bit of a try and test. I try to look a little bit about the teachers, the location, but it's also very difficult to be able to assess teachers that you never actually experience firsthand. And might be impossible, especially for us, if you don't have the chance to go to India, test different teachers, and then say, okay, I'm going to go back to this specific studio, is not possible. So always just trusting your gut and taking the experience for what it is.
Okay, I think this is also like a good point to set the frame for all the listeners, that your expectations shouldn't be that high, and that of course it's always your personal experience. And we can just kind of hope the best. So I'm happy for you that you have a great experience, and my experience personally was like the same. The second teacher training was even more like bonding with people and having this deep connection. I think it's of course because you have these circumstances around you mentioned earlier, that you don't have to care about too much, and you really focus on something you love, and all the people are in the same vibe. I think this is a pretty good surrounding, but of course it doesn't have to be like this. And like you mentioned before, in India everything can happen, nothing is fixed. So even like in teacher training, it's hard to really, yeah, make a decision for something. How did you ended up in India itself? So you mentioned you were teaching in Mysore and in Goa. How do you come up with that?
So basically, I come from a background where I've been working in digital marketing. So that's what I was doing in Milan, London, and then Tenerife. I was kind of like leading a small digital agency. So once I was studying in India, I was thinking that I really wanted to continue my yoga journey. So I gave some classes to my partner and some friends, And then I felt I think I can try and give classes to small groups as well. So that's where I kind of like tried my luck, getting in touch with these studios and some yoga teachers from India, just to see if they were also interested in a bit of karma yoga partnership in a way, where I was basically helping them with their digital needs. So kind of like helping them with web development, email development, SEO, and so on. So I was happy to teach, but I was also trying to utilize my other skills, because until that time I was a different person. I was utilizing my skills in that area, so I didn't want to start completely from scratch. So obviously there are many people that are looking for experiences, and I was also thinking this is something else that I can provide to you. Like some people might go to studios and say I can play the guitar or I can sing very well, and that might also help them to attract people to resonate with different studios. So one of my extra skills was basically my digital marketing skills. That is kind of like completely separate word from yoga, but is also one of the reasons that kind of like helped me to find gigs so easily, because many yoga people are not very digi-savvy. At least that was my experience in India. So they were more than willing to learn more about that side. While on the other hand, I was basically getting more experience as a yoga teacher with small groups and then bigger groups.
Okay, that's super cool. I think even so, it's like interesting for people who maybe want to start teaching now, and maybe not in India, but in general. I can recommend the same, like going to studios, even in Europe, or maybe as well if you have like a kind of vacation, and just trying to combine what you already know and what you can like bring up to them. And even like it's a good start to just try out with friends, get the first kind of experience, and maybe as well like just starting out with karma yoga. I think nowadays everybody thinks he has to be perfect and he has to be the start with charging money, but I think this is good advice for people willing to start, that you even can just start by doing karma yoga and just really showing the people what you can do, learn more about yourself and your own practice. So did you spend as well like COVID in India when it happened?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, don't be afraid of mixing any of your previous knowledge, just to stick to the yoga word and etiquette. Like, if you have other skills, try and merge them together. Yeah, so it's been one of the most challenging period of my life for sure. Because when COVID happened, I was actually traveling to Maldives at the time, which is super close to Goa. So it was very easy trip from there. And then that's where the news starting from China, and then it moved to Italy. So even on the way back to India, my passport was basically checked so many times because they wanted to know if I had been to Italy anytime soon. But then in India, as soon as I landed, everything was kind of like normal at first. I celebrated the Holi festival as well, while in Italy, everything was starting to close down. And then I felt, okay, maybe I need to stay here. But after a while, it started to feel very unsafe in India as well. So there were so many of the local people that always been super gentle and kind, started to become a little bit more um, I don't know, they were looking at you in a weird way, especially if they knew that you were Italian, because COVID started in Italy, in Europe at first. So I felt a little bit of a like a scarlet letter on me. And then things started to become even more agitated in India. So that's where I decided to go back to Italy. So I went back to my parents' place, and that was very challenging because I left that place since something like 14, 15 years. So going back there and being super humbling. As I was telling you, like I felt like I was very calm. I had very yogic mindset. I was waking up early, practicing every day, eating super healthy. Then I went back home, trying to do my self practice in my room with my parents, entering the room at all the time, and then kind of like raising their voice for all kind of reasons. So it felt very, very, very challenging. And that's where basically the yoga experience is coming from, because yoga is not really like the asana practice in your room. It's trying to keep calm also in very challenging situation, where also when you don't have control about what's happening outside, that's the only thing you can do. Can have control on yourself. So trying to say, okay, I need to stay calm. I don't need to lose my patience. I don't need to raise my voice on the back when something is happening. And I need to think about what's happening next to try and find my roots again. Because I think something that was happening to me, I didn't really feel very rooted because I had been traveling around for more than 2 years. I left Tenerife and I knew that I was not gonna go back to this place because it was not in line with me. So I was trying to find a place where I could feel rooted once again with my partner. So I think that was big challenge, and it really helped me a lot to understand how to really maintain my yogic mindset, if we can call it like that, also in situations that are beyond our control, and also trying to find the best of what can come from this very challenging situation. And I think something else they also was a big turning point for me was trying to understand that I also needed a little bit of economic stability more. Because if I'm not stable from an economic point of view, I'm not able to actually focus on my yoga journey. So during my traveling years, as I was telling you, it was a lot of karma yoga, it was a lot of savings that were putting into that after I've been saving quite a lot during my London and Tenerife years, but I didn't feel like I could do all of that for very long. So that's where basically I decided that if I could find a stable job back to my digital marketing roots, then I could focus more on my asana practice or my philosophy practice or my pranayama practice. And that's where I am at the moment. Because I feel that if I'm stable, if I have a place I can call home that is serene, is clean, is something that I feel comfortable with, and then I don't need to worry about bills. I don't need to worry about, okay, what's happening next month if I don't teach all of these classes every single month, or if I need to keep utilizing my savings. I'm not gonna feel comfortable with myself. Like yoga at first came from Raj Yoga. It was practiced by the kings because they have all the time at their space. They didn't have to think about going to work. They didn't have to think about cooking and all of those things. But it's different for us because for us, we also need to think about we need to pay for our bills. What's happening next month if I only focus on yoga?
And even so, I think this is much more relatable for a lot of your students, right? To have like a day-to-day job and not like spending all your life around yoga. Because I think this even is again a kind of box or cliche, which makes it hard for people to get the first step on their yoga journey. That they think, okay, all these yoga teachers are like so far away, so spiritual, so full into that, and I'm just doing it maybe once a week. And yeah, I think this is like even better relatable, and it gives you like again the space to enjoy your own practice and putting away this pressure that you have to make out of your passion, your income. I think this is nowadays again like a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves to make a living out of what they love, and while they're doing that they stop loving what they do. So what does it gives you to teach? So you do it not out of a financial background. What is the intention behind you are teaching?
Yeah, no, definitely like it's not for the economic comeback at all. If I decide to continue teaching yoga, is because I like the experience of sharing this moment with other people. Like you share a lot with people and you get a lot from the other people. I felt that yoga really helped me to become a more balanced person, especially after all the struggles that I experienced while I was in Tenerife. So that's what I'm trying to give all the time to the students. So that's why in my classes I always try, apart from the asana practice, to always have a little bit of philosophy, a little bit of pranayama as well, because that was helped me a lot. There's always like a little bit of meditation at the end. Um, Maybe people will start just with a normal asana practice, and that's completely fine because that's the way I started as well. So that's why I'm also like a big advocate of yoga in the gyms, because even if they don't chant, they don't have meditation, they don't have pranayama, that's a good way to introduce people to yoga. Then they can go to a studio maybe and they can learn more about the other aspects of yoga. But that's what I feel I'm trying to give to my students, a little bit of peace of mind, serenity, letting the breathing become their guide, to calm themselves down when they're feeling stress, anxiety, and when they feel anger. And that was my way of also trying to calm myself. I felt like in the past I had a little bit of anger issues. And then through yoga, I also learned to always calm myself down every time I was experiencing all of that, not going straight to the attack. So it's also something I think people don't tend to overshare a lot because they don't always like to talk about their weak side to say, oh yeah, I was a very angry person, I was like a violent person or something. They never say that because it's not very yogic, but we all come from a place that we have our way of dealing with emotions, sometimes in a negative way. Some people become very have lots of anxiety, some people become very angry. So that was my I felt like I need to calm down a lot the fire that I had in myself and understand why it was such a big fire.
Okay, a point I really want to take out here is that you accepted that hard times like a part of all of our lives and that they are sometimes not negotiable or they are not negotiable at all, but that you can use the tool of yoga as a as your modern lifestyle, as your lifestyle in your day-to-day life as a kind of tool to deal with that. And I think this is like a big shift in the perspective for a lot of people. And even like that you took this, I would say, setback or this hard time in your life to revalidate what you know about yourself and what you think you want, and getting back to your values, getting back to your roots, like you described it, and really um, even deciding against this teaching lifestyle as a yoga teacher in full time to I think this is like super super deep and gives you really really good understanding of um what yoga actually can do for you and how do you use it. Was it ever your plan to really go back to full-time teaching?
Yeah. And I was thinking a little bit about becoming like a yoga teacher full time. And that's kind of like what I was trying to do when I was in India. But then after COVID, I realized that I had also other priorities. And I was kind of also like, kind of in a way, honoring also my background and all my skills. I didn't want to throw them away completely. So that's also what I'm telling my students because at first I was thinking like the yoga teachers that were teaching full time, they were kind of like more in a way kind of like qualified. They were even if we can say in very simple words better than the teachers, than part-time teachers. But then now I feel that I'm more than happy to share my experience that I have like normally 3 classes a week and then have another full-time job. So I'm able to balance everything pretty easily. And you were mentioning also earlier about comparing yourself with other teachers. So for me, that was also like one of my initial blockers in becoming a teacher because I felt, oh, I'm not as flexible as so many other people that I see around myself. They are teaching as well. I don't have like a stable handstand practice, so I'm not going to be able to teach because people won't see me for an experienced teacher. But I think that also became one of my strengths because, for example, I try to think all the time when people come to the class that there are always going to be beginners. There are people not able to do some of the asanas that comes very natural for us. So that's why I always try to integrate as many variations as I can because I always think about all these different body types. And I feel that sometimes now I'm a little bit more advanced in my asana practice. I can also tell people that this didn't come natural to me at all. Like at first, when I started my yoga journey, I could barely bend my neck without basically having problems into my neck. I felt like I was very, very stiff. And it really changed a lot with a very steady, dedicated practice. Now just thinking about the physical side of things.
I think this is like a super important point, even for a lot of people who wants to share their yoga experience or who wants to share their own kind of journey with people in yoga. A lot of people like compare themselves with like professional teachers or like nowadays super famous people on Instagram. But I think it's super important to remember that even so, there's for every teacher, student, and maybe there are even students which needs your kind of style. And I think every teacher has his own style, and it's not just about doing crazy asanas or doing the best kind of physical practice. Some people even are not able to do like the basic asanas, and so if you are just one step ahead of them, it can be super helpful for them even to learn like the downward dog or the folding forward. And I think you always have to think about this. And even if you are, or if you come from this point of being self not really flexible or physical able, and you can bring this empathy in your class and you create this space for your students, this is super valuable. And I think even this is much more important for a lot of people, or a lot of even beginner yogis, which maybe visit a yoga class first time, than having the most professional teacher, you know? And so I really, I really go with what you said. And I think even so, it's like super important to set the boundaries super low for people to begin with yoga, and like not, yeah, putting up more boundaries. Because I think even nowadays there are, even if yoga gets more and more famous, there's still a lot of like boxes or cliches yoga is in, which makes it a bit like kind of difficult for a certain kind of people to join classes or just like learn about yoga and just start with that. So, what do you think are typical cliches or boxes you see yoga now?
Well, I think one of the biggest cliches is that yoga is for girls, for sure. So that's what is stopping a lot of guys to start practicing yoga. And that was a little bit the same for me as well. There's probably like toxic masculinity that we have over there. That I didn't want to be like the only guy into a room full of girls, even if I'm gay myself. But I don't know, I felt like it was a bit, I felt out of place. I felt, oh, maybe I'm not meant to be here. And this is changing a lot, but I think it's still a little bit of a barrier. So obviously, when I went to India, most of the teachers were guys. So it's kind of like equal the number of guys and girls practicing yoga, but there are so many men. While I think in Europe and in America, even if things are changing, there is still like a big majority of girls teaching and practicing yoga. So they might stop other guys to think, oh yeah, yoga is for girls. I'm just gonna focus on other kind of activities. But I think it's changing a lot. I think having more guys teaching yoga is helping. I noticed that, for example, I have more and more guys coming to my classes. Maybe sometimes they also like to see more male energy coming from the teacher. So they might think, okay, so I'm welcome here because even if I'm the only male student, there is a male teacher. So I'm not like completely alone. And hopefully this is going to change in the future. Now there is more this conscious movement that is getting more popular, that I think is attracting quite a lot of guys, but in a way is very similar to the yoga practice. So maybe from conscious movement, people are moving to the yoga practice later on. So I think it's positive. I think that's why it's also important to have more male teachers so that it can become more popular across all genders.
Absolutely. I think this is like, even nowadays, one of the biggest cliches or boxes yoga is still in, even in the Western world. Um, and I find my own in your story, absolutely, because when I first started my yoga journey and I visited like a drop-in class in Miami Beach in the morning, there were like at least, I think, 85% girls. And of course it's not a problem, but it I know this feeling of not feeling right fitting into that. And I can imagine that a lot of guys could really benefit from just trying yoga, just like seeing the positive aspects. And like you said, there's, yeah, so much more about yoga to learn, and so much more about positive effects you can really take from yoga. And all of this other stuff, like this mindfulness movements and stuff, is in the end just part of yoga itself. And so I think it's a positive it's definitely a positive drive, and I see it the same way like you, that we need more teachers which like open the space, which create the space to hold that for people and make it even more accessible for everybody, and to raise like the collective by making yoga more accessible. I hope this podcast as well is like one step in this direction. And if we think about how to open the space of yoga or how to make yoga more accessible to people, are there any kind of resources or like studies or classes or workshops you would have you would like to recommend to new people like trying to get more into this field of yoga, which are maybe not absolutely or like 100% related to yoga? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, I actually had this book that I have here. There is Enlightening Tales by Swami Satchidananda, which is a really nice book because, quick preview for you, because I think it really helps to break down some of the yoga philosophy very, very easily with this kind of tales that could be read by kids as well. We were talking before about how to keep a quiet mind also outside of the teacher training when you were going back to Italy. There is a tale in this book which is about this guru. If I can tell you the tale quickly. Uh, so this guru basically used to live in this cave for 25 years. And when he left the cave after all of this year, he told everybody that he never got upset during all of this time there. And then the people from the village were surrounding the guru because they knew how popular he was, that he lived all of this time by himself. And they keep asking me, but did you really not get upset? Not even once. And he keeps replying, no, not at all, not even once. But are you sure? Not even when you didn't have any food or when it was raining, did you not get a little bit upset? And he kept repeating, not at all. And they kept asking him the same question. They just say, but you sure not even a little bit? And then that's where the guru starts shouting to say, no, I told you I never got upset, not at all. And the guru realized after that the real challenge was not to not being upset when he was by himself in a cave, but it's not to be upset when you're surrounded by people. So it kind of like went back to step zero.
Oh, that's cool, because I think even because it's not like the typical Bhagavad Gita or a really deep philosophical yoga book, it maybe makes it even more accessible for a lot of people. And if the descriptions are super easy, this is even like more relatable in our nowadays life, because I think even this is like a big problem that people nowadays have this ancient view of yoga and think, yeah, the philosophy part is like super hard to translate into our modern life. But I think this book sounds like super easy to understand. You have anything else?
I have this other book which is called How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino, which is also something that I wish my younger self could have read earlier, which is an amazing book about this uncle and his nephew and they exchange letters. And it's a bit of a coming of age story when this kid learn a lot about life, about philosophy, about ethic, and the uncle is kind of like guiding him to explain different things into life. There's this specific chapter that it really resonated with me, which is about making mistakes and regrets. So during this chapter, basically the protagonist of the book, which they call Copper, make a mistakes. So their friends are having a fight with other kids, and he's so scared and he's not able to help his friend. So he just see his friends getting into physical fight, and he just staring. So at the end of the fight, his friends walk away, and he just goes home and he starts crying because he feels bad about himself. And he felt like, oh, I've been so uh, bad. Like I was not able to help my friends when they were in need. And he goes through all of this time of regret and thinking there is no way to go back. His friends are kind of like not talking to him anymore. He just goes to school by himself. And then he talks with the uncle and he understands that basically all people do mistakes. And it's not about not making mistakes because they're always going to happen, but it's about how you can regain yourself from making those mistakes. So he basically goes and apologizes to his friends, and he promised to himself, to his friends, to be a better person in the future. So I really like that part, because sometimes we think we need to be perfect. We don't need to do all of these things. We don't need to happen to have this kind of problem mistakes, but they're always going to happen. It's more about how you react than what kind of problems you can avoid. So I really recommend you this book. It's super, super nice. Yeah. How do you live? It's called.
It's funny because I really see your story you just told us, and your learnings from your yoga path and your journey in this story you just described. So I think there's like a circle closing here, for sure. And I think even this is like a good example that yoga is not just, or even other kind of resources don't have to be related directly to yoga or have to mention yoga to be a part of yoga, or can be a part of your yoga journey, and you can take something from that. And so I think even again, it's super important to say that the real practice of yoga is not the physical practice and not the practice you do on your mat. This is just the preparation, and that is so much more about like integrating this in your day-to-day life. And I think the resources you just mentioned are sounds awesome. So I think I will definitely have a look on that. I will definitely link them below in the show notes. So check that out, guys. And yeah, last but not least, Andrea, if some of the people here in the podcast now wants to get in touch with you, or are around in Barcelona, how can they get in touch with you?
Um, Probably through my Instagram, if they don't live in Barcelona, is Andrea underscore born in a boot. Or feel free to come to one of my classes. I usually teach at these two studios. They're called Yoga Club and Shanti. And I practice in other yoga studios as well. And yeah, that's it mainly.
Andrea, this was like a awesome conversation. Thanks so much for that. I think there was so much value in there, and I hope that even this shows the people listening to this podcast that they are not just like super famous and fancy influencers nowadays and yoga teachers which are super super professional. I think it's super important to showcase as well just people like you and me doing their own practice, being on their way of yoga, and seeing and showing off how their personal way evolved and changed their life. So, thank you so much for sharing. Um, yeah, I hope to see you soon in Barcelona, and let's keep in touch.
Thank you so much, Marvin. Thanks for having me. Thank you. Thank you.